You know, someone very profoundly once said many years ago that if fascism ever comes to America, it'll come in the name of liberalism.
Oh, beautiful, full spacious skies, for amber waves of grain, for purple mountain majesties above the fruited plain. America, God shed His grace on thee, and crown thy good with.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Patriots and Petticoats, it is my pleasure to welcome you aboard Flight 1776 with service to the United States of America and continuing service to a more perfect union. Federal regulations require that carry-on items are stowed prior to closing the aircraft door. Your items may be placed in an overhead compartment or completely under the seat in front of you. Use caution when placing items in or removing them from the overhead compartment, and let us know if we may assist you. In order to expedite the boarding process, please be seated as quickly as possible after stowing your items and take a moment to review the Constitution and Declaration of Independence located on the device in your pocket. If you are unable or unwilling to perform the functions as described on those documents, please let us know and we will find a more suitable destination for you. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to spending our evening with you. What is up, everybody? Welcome to Patriots and Petticoats on this fine Sunday evening at 8:30. We have a little bit of a different episode for you guys this evening. No intro monologue or anything like that. We're going to kind of get down into the nitty gritty. We have Kaisa with us this evening, and there was a little bit of banter back and forth. I'm going to actually let Chris explain kind of how this conversation took place, what happened leading up to why Kaisa is on our show this evening. So, Chris, if you don't mind sharing with everyone what happened and why he's here with us.
Yeah. Hey, Kaisa. So me and Kaisa, you know what? I do a lot of shit posting on Twitter with people who probably know that know me on Twitter. So me and Kaisa it said maybe went back and forth for a minute about something. Maybe Kaisa remembers. Do you remember what the post was about?
I don't remember exactly what the original post was, but I know the thing I responded to was, one of those people believe in Karl Marx, but not Santa Claus type.
Yes. Okay. And then we started going back and forth a little jabby, and then started talking. And then I was like, maybe just, this would be way better if we just came on Patriots and Petticoats and talked about it. Basically, it got to where it was like 260 characters weren't going to work anymore. Maybe there's some nuance to this.
And so can you talk a little bit about yourself, Kaisa, kind of what you do? I know that you have a YouTube channel and stuff like that. Tell us a little bit about yourself, independent of what the discussion's supposed to be today.
Yeah, so my background, I grew up conservative Christian, and was always very interested in art. Started playing video games in my teens, and then I went to college for game design and kind of general art study of media. And then over the past couple of years, only as of maybe 3 years ago, my political philosophy started changing. I went from being a 16-year-old who liked Trump to being a never Trumper in 2019, to, libertarianism was a brief stint in there. And then eventually I started being more open to leftist talking points. And I kind of skipped over the Democrat Party because they're a bunch of psychopaths. But I basically got radicalized by some interesting leftist points, and that convicted me on social issues. and that's how I ended up where I am now, as far as politics goes.
Okay, so when you say you were radicalized by some talking points, social issues, talk to me a little bit about what those social issues are that have you in a position where you're supporting Marxism, Leninist theory.
Yeah. So I had started to have convictions about immigration, treatment of immigrants, as well as racial policies in this country. Started to kind of get that, I want to care for poor people type attitude. And that very slowly brought me along to, this kind of goes hands in hand with overall egalitarianism. And then kind of went from egalitarianism to more leftist radical, liberation ideals.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning of what you just said. So let's talk about immigration. How does our current immigration policy and what we do, how would that be better under communism?
Well, for starters, the basic problem I have with our treatment, kind of handling of immigration, is that oftentimes corporations will basically lobby for keeping illegal immigration as a thing, and even incentivizing it by lobbying for making citizenship hard to obtain and things like that. Because it's very useful for corporations to have illegal immigrants as part of their workforce. So that's kind of basically where I started with that. I haven't delved too much into kind of the Marxist solution for that. But at the very least, I think a good start is to start reforming immigration policy, make citizenship easier, and probably to limit the amount of deportations that we engage in.
So I don't disagree with that. I don't disagree with the position that we should make immigration easier personally. Chris, Eric, you guys chime in. I don't want to hog the floor or anything like that.
Yeah. I think we should incentivize and make easier the path to become a citizen, because I think a majority of the people who come here are hardworking people who hear about, what you call, a personal of my personal experience. Every illegal immigrant that I've ever worked with has been busting their ass and sending the money back home. It's all about living a better life. I would love for these people to be American citizens and to be actually on our team. Absolutely. And the process, from what I've heard, is an absolute pain in the ass.
Yeah, it's terrible.
So you need to make it where a person with the willingness, who has the drive and the real desire, make it doable for that person. Don't have it, this impossible obstacle course that's there just so you can say it's there.
I want to give just a small amount of pushback there. A lot of these people are coming to this country for what reason?
I mean, many reasons. Nefarious reasons, I assume, are the ones you're getting at.
No.
No,
Many of
because
the
it's
people
one of
are
the
coming-
greatest countries in the world.
Yeah.
Well, they're coming here for economic opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Problem is
so,
that money's going back to Mexico. If they could be citizens, they'd come here, make that money here, and spend that money here.
right. So, Kaija, I want to understand, when you're talking about how awful this immigration system is, it is. And there's still people doing it, right? Like, there's still people going through the process. There's still people coming here illegally. Why do you think there's so much effort to get out of their countries to come here?
There's a lot of corruption and crime in South American countries. They're very
Yes.
dangerous places, very impoverished places.
Right. So are we on the same page that our economic system as it stands right now is a better system than what's in place for those countries?
In some ways. For example, with Mexico, it's like, yes, it's true that we have a better system here, but also a primary cause of all of the terrible things that go on in Mexico is that the American government via the ATF or the CIA are involved in the cartels and in arms trafficking and drug trafficking and all those sorts of things.
Do you like the CIA and the FBI and the ATF?
Not one bit, no.
Well, welcome to our
we'll
podcast.
have different reasons for that, I suspect, but
But we're all on the same page. The reasons don't matter. We just need to get them the fuck out of there.
Too many of those.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
we were already starting the podcast with like we're not far off. We can get into the reasons, but do the reasons matter as long as the actions are taken?
I
Down
think
the
after
line,
the
but
actions
not
are
in
Down the
taken
line,
and-
yes, down the
Yeah.
line. You're right about that. But to start the conversation,
Yeah.
we can do that.
Of course.
So talk to me. Okay, so that was and then you mentioned minority situations here, I think is something that you said. Talk to me a little bit about that, because I'm really interested to hear this part of how you were radicalized. Like, what is it that radicalized you?
Well, there's a lot of issues in impoverished communities, in Black communities, and in Black areas of cities, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that there's no money in those communities, which, in my opinion, has a lot to do with intergenerational wealth not really being a thing for them because of how recent the Civil Rights Act was, and the way that we kind of handle that right now, in principle, might be a good idea. Like, oh, there's crime, and we need to police crime, but also crime, like the primary cause of crime is poverty. And so if you could, instead of over policing these communities, which causes a lot of problems like single parent homes and things like this, as well as dependence on welfare, and instead you could tackle the problem of poverty in those areas, which would just make everything better, then that would be a better solution than the kind of typical Republican and even center Democrat and some left Democrats as well of just over policing those areas.
Okay, so let's say, for the sake of argument, let's say we stop policing those areas. Let's say we stop doing that. However, now we've stopped policing them. How does that generate more income for those areas?
So I don't think we should stop policing those areas. I think we should reduce how heavily we police them, and also reform our prison system so that we can have higher rates of recidivism. And that would, at the very least, give those families the same opportunities as a white family in a rich area with two parents in the household, because two parents is better than one parent in a household for a lot of reasons, both when it comes to earning money and when it comes to the development of the children. So in the long term, that can create more financial stability if there are more people able to earn more money in those areas.
Do you think
Okay,
universal basic income would help in these areas?
I think it could help, but I also think it's a Band-Aid solution.
I'm not sure how I
Chris,
feel about it.
Well, so I think statistically in America, and I may be wrong about this, if you do 3 things that will lift you out of poverty or give you a hell of a leg up: graduate high school, get a job, do not have kids before you get married, don't get divorced. Maybe that's 4 things. That right there is the key.
If you do the first 3, you could probably survive even a divorce.
Just doing those will pull you out of poverty, and then the next generation goes a little further, and then the next, and then
They start out here.
Yeah,
your
and
grandkids, right?
generally, I agree with that. Especially the first 2. I think the first 2 are far more important.
What were the first 2? Graduate high school, get a job.
Yeah, and
Those are important.
a big problem with the reason that a lot of Black kids can't get through high school is because take the Chicago school system, for example. It's an
I live in
entirely
Wisconsin. We're right here, so I listen to it all the time.
Yeah,
because our
it's an
main media
entirely
is Chicago.
impoverished. Yeah, it's an entirely impoverished school system, and
Bad.
it's because it's funded. Public school systems are funded by property taxes and income tax, and if there's not a lot of that going on, you can't fund the school system.
That's the per pupil. It's the number. It's the 10th highest per pupil that they're getting. Baltimore's the highest. It's 17,500 per student. I think in Oklahoma it's around.
Where's it going?
Per student. Where is it going? That's what we all would like to know. I'm sure everybody watching and all of us right here. We would all love to know how you can take so much of our labor and not do shit with it.
Yeah, I'm not aware of those statistics. I'm sure they could be correct, but also I think the just pure size of those cities would have an impact on that as well.
So I want to back up really fast. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Chris.
I was gonna say for Chicago, so they get a sufficient amount of money per pupil. Now, what they don't have, or we talked about this last week on the show. We're coming into like our grandparents, my grandparents. I'm 46 years old, just so you know. My grandparents never got divorced. None of that generation. They just stayed together.
No.
And then the next generation is my parents, who was the civil rights movement and the women's movement, all that. That's my mom. I mean, she was at Haight-Ashbury. She was all in that shit. And then so she was a corporate woman, the first one in the family. And then my dad did heat and air, right? And then they're the first ones to ever get divorced. So I'm the first latchkey kid. Now we're that first generation. Now we're down 3-4 generations later, and now we're starting to look to me a little bit feral, a little bit like we're not quite as civilized as we were 5 generations ago.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of reasons for that,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think, as a Marxist, kind of one of the things that comes first for me is the analysis of material conditions, and the difference between the power of the dollar now versus 40 years ago, as well as the cost of things going up exponentially, contributes to a lot of just more people struggling, more people being impoverished, which can lead to higher rates of divorce as well. Yeah.
Working you got to work 80 hours. So I do HVAC when I'm not doing like my day job. And the rate of divorce is really high because it's summer times are 80-hour weeks.
Yeah. Yeah. I grew up in Idaho. I know a lot of HVAC guys and HVAC guys from California as well.
They run and run and run.
Yeah.
Guys, I want to ask you a question, because the thing that I'm struggling with is you're talking about people needing more money, right? They're impoverished. What are the means by which that those people get more money?
Yeah.
So this is one of the big differences between me and a Democrat, because and that difference in political philosophy, I don't know if you guys are how familiar you guys are with the terms academically, but liberalism, neoliberalism, as these two types of capitalism. And so I think the Democrats tend to run with kind of the neoliberal solution, which is just give them some money. It'll be fine. And a lot of the times that money, they keep it under a certain amount so it won't actually be effective. But even if they give them a bunch more money, that wouldn't even necessarily fix the problem. Because what has to happen is total systemic reform, right? You have to have the money coming in plus business development plus prison reform, all these things. And you have to keep policing and crime somewhat in check while you're doing all of that. So it's a very complex issue, and Democrats fail epically on addressing it.
So
I think intentionally.
You are
It seems
Marxist.
intentional.
It is intentional. That's why.
Marxist
Nobody's that
theory-
inept. Sorry,
Heather.
No, you're fine. I want to make sure that I understand, because Marxist theory begins at the very ground root is that you seize the means of production. That's what Karl Marx's theory begins with. That's the beginning of the systematic change, right?
Sort of. So that is where he starts with his development of political theory and Critique on Political Economy and the Communist Manifesto. But things like advocating for these smaller changes in the modern day are definitely also Marxist. They're just like, what, like, we have to do all of that, and seizing the means of production also has to happen, for through the means of increase in unionization and the ability for workers to have more bargaining power with bosses and things like that.
Can I ask a quick question?
Mhm.
Would you say in 2023, and this is for all three of you, do you think this political philosophy is working its way in the back door of the White House? Because the front door would be a bang, bang, bang.
No, Marxism is not.
Okay.
My opinion on all of that is basically that the Democratic Party in the 70s, 80s, 90s started adopting a working class aesthetic. And ultimately, they didn't actually change their positions, their policies. They stayed neoliberal, which is lots of problems with neoliberalism. But they didn't change anything. Like, everything they're doing is still neoliberal. They just wrap it up in leftist aesthetics. They talk about liberation. They talk about racial justice. They talk about social justice.
To get you to the polls?
Yeah. And then they keep on doing their same neoliberal policies.
So, okay. Leninism is like the warpath of Marxism, right? Like, it's the action that's taken behind it.
Sort of. So Marxism-Leninism is ultimately rooted in Lenin's book, Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism. And basically, the idea of that book is to take Marx's theory about how capitalism works, what it needs to do in order to survive, and its oppression, and it takes it to its logical conclusion and says capitalism has to do imperialism in order to survive. So, for example, with America as our case study, our corporations have to keep using labor abroad, and slaves in China or in Southeast Asian countries, or our corporations have a lot of basically slaves in Africa and South America. And a lot of those countries really are just run by American corporations. And so that idea is just that, like, as capitalism developed from, the 1600s until now, through mercantilism and meritocracy out of the ashes of feudalism, people, merchant classes started rising up and having power over their government, which is good. And then they kind of took that and started going to other places, going to Africa. The English Empire started imperializing, taking over places, taking slaves, and using this cheap and free labor as the basis to generate the most amount of profits for those countries. That was the kind of their path to richness. So the idea is that is like a core thing that keeps capitalism going.
Well, and in Leninist theory, there has to be a centralized power to maintain everything as we move through this as we flip the script, so to speak, right?
So Marx's idea was the dictatorship of the proletariat, and Lenin's version of that was the Vanguard Party.
Yes.
And I do not necessarily agree with everything about the Vanguard Party. I think that the ability, the number one priority in government structure is for the people to have the power over the central authorities or central officers. So no matter what form, even if it is a vanguard system, the people have to have the power to oust anybody in that position of power.
So,
like through a democracy?
Yeah. And modern Marxist Leninist theory is very, very, very democratic.
It's mob rule then.
Yeah, you can put it that way.
I mean, sorry, simple terms, kindergarten terms.
I have 2 additional questions, and then I'm going to go to some of these comments real quick.
Mhm.
So the first question that I have for you is, do you believe that your labor belongs to someone else in the form of financial compensation?
I believe that everybody has a right to own their own labor power because you are the laborer. Just inherently, like if you went back to social contract theory with Rousseau and Locke, people are the source of labor, and so to some extent, you have a right over your labor. And I think in a capitalist system, not always, but it tends towards alienating you from your labor as much as possible, because that's how the highest profits happen.
Wait, what? I'm sorry. I'm trying to follow. I'm not trying to be disrespectful. The
No
only
worries.
person that's between me and my labor is the government. It's not, you aren't. Eric's not. I determine how much money I make based off of my effort.
But you can only get as much as you are offered by people who are employers. I agree that the government also stands in the place. Yeah, you can start your own company, and then you are the person who has total control over your labor power. That's the other part of the analysis of capitalism, is that capitalism has 2 classes: capitalists and laborers. Capitalists are the ones who own the means of production, like somebody who owns their own business, and workers are the ones who are employed by capitalists. That doesn't mean that capitalists don't do work. They obviously do. But that is to say that laborers have less control over their labor power than capitalists have over theirs.
But if the capitalists didn't take the risk and the time and the energy and the money and the effort, the laborers wouldn't have jobs in the first place.
Yeah, I don't. So I don't advocate for no profit or no return on investment. I think to some extent, especially for most of a period of transition away from capitalism or in capitalism as well, you have a right to your return on investment, absolutely, and you should get a return on your investment, because otherwise, why did you make the investment? But I don't think that should come in the form of taking 95% of the value that your workers generate for you, like many corporations do.
Okay. I'm going to ask my other question after I go to these comments real fast, if you guys are cool with that. Patriot Girl Prepper in the house. Hello, love. It's good to see you here. Joey said, Blessed Lord's Day and happy Sunday. Joey always with... Oh, come on, exit. Does this guy's nose honk when you squeeze it? I'm not sure. He can squeeze it himself. I guess I just think we should ignore history. We have an anti-communist in the chat, in case you can't tell. It's not egalitarian at all. Hey, from Israel. Hello, what's up in Israel? Well, being originally from the UK, you need a better healthcare system.
Does anybody have a good one?
Do what?
Does anybody have a good one?
No, they don't.
Have a doctor in your family. That's the only good healthcare system.
Right. Nah, you don't survive divorce. You need to get out of debt first. Joey says, I'm feeling Chris and the boomer flower child parents literally the same. My grandparents were married 52 years when my papa reposed. Tex is here. Now it's a party. Tex, good to see you in here, man. Bulletproof Baldy says, has any of this worked in the past? So I actually have an answer to that question. There are 4 countries currently that still put in practice Marxist-Leninist theory. The first is the People's Republic of China. The second is the Socialist Republic of Vietnam, the Republic of Cuba, and Laos People's Democratic Republic. So that was actually my next question to you. There are 4 countries that live the life that you wish to live, why don't you just go to one of those 4 countries and live under the system that you want?
Well, America's the richest country in the world. So that's not to put any particular praise for the capitalist system here. But for example, those countries may not have the same First Amendment rights that we have here. Most countries don't enshrine the right to free speech. And I think that's very important. And I value my right to free speech. And yeah, it's the richest country in the world. So we are better off living here. And ultimately, even under a capitalist system, than a lot of people are in poorer off countries. I don't think that's the fault of socialism, but yeah. And then also to more broadly address has any of this worked in the past? It's a really complex or I guess an annoying answer to question to answer, because every communist country from Russia to China to Cuba has committed terrible atrocities, and were run by corrupt political leaders, and were authoritarian in many ways. But their socialist
They were just
policies,
guys at one point, though. I feel like the
True.
human element
yeah,
plays a big
absolutely.
part in these atrocities.
Which is why modern socialist theory is more democratic than it has been in the past. And yeah, I think that's a pretty big L of socialism experiments in the past. But so the other part of the answer, we should acknowledge the atrocities that all of these leaders committed, Stalin and Mao and Fidel Castro especially. But Lenin too, yeah. But Lenin didn't last very long. But if you consider where those Soviet countries were pre and post revolution, a lot of the socialist policies did work to improve material conditions and to lift people out of poverty, and especially in Russia and China, accelerated their technological development because they were basically feudal countries in complete disarray before their revolutions, which is a big part of why the revolutions happened. And in Cuba, they were under the Batista regime. They had every right to revolt against the Batista regime.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a complex issue to be like, well, yeah, it's bad that there was authoritarianism. It's bad that they killed everybody. But the socialism isn't what failed. It's that we didn't keep these people in check. Which
What
can launch
makes
into
you
a
think
big
that
discussion of
the
socialism.
attempt will be any different moving forward?
Well, I think it's important now that we are stressing accountability and the ability to stop any authoritarianism from happening. And the original Marxist idea, the dictatorship of the proletariat, is inherently anti-authoritarian. It was these other people, Stalin, Mao, Trotsky, who really just kind of got rid of that whole idea and very quickly forgot that the people are supposed to be in charge.
I feel like that's kind of the deal. Like that's what happens. And that's what will happen.
That's what has
Absolute
happened.
power.
But I don't think it's inherent to the political philosophy.
I meant like that's what has happened. That's what's
Mhm.
happening now. So as a mathematician, that's what will happen in the future.
Yeah. No,
So,
and I totally get like that whole perspective. But to the people, I mean, kind of the way I respond on Twitter, as well as capitalism worked, because everywhere capitalism's been tried, we did see a great increase of poverty, or not poverty, of prosperity, of wealth generation, and lifting people out of poverty. But we also saw what conservatives will call corporatism and neoliberalism and all of these things that also arose. And a lot of people on the right and left will look at America today and say, well, this isn't working. But for some reason, they'll say socialism's never worked in the past, but capitalism has.
So socialism doesn't work in the past, and let's just pretend capitalism works half-ass and socialism works half-ass. Let's pretend
Well,
they both work
yeah.
half-ass, okay? Like
Does
they work
anything-
to a point, but in so capital, how are you a free individual in socialism? Because if we're both working with two half-ass fucking systems that we're trying to make work as we go, both
Mhm.
have flaws. In a Marxist system, do I own my property?
So it depends. There's a big confusion when people look from the right at socialism, where they see Marx saying we need to abolish private property, right? Private
Sounds-
property and personal property are two different things. Private property and the abolition of private property is the advocacy for the control over the means of productions, i.e., getting rid of corporate private property and having that be owned by the dictatorship of the proletariat.
Ooh, I don't like that word. That was like a fucking COVID jab.
Yeah, it's scary because the word dictatorship. But no, I don't think it's inherent to socialist systems that you get rid of personal property like a home. And in fact, a lot of modern socialists will advocate for the government or for the state to give a base level of housing as like the default, the starting point, a shitty 1-bedroom studio, let's say. And then as you earn, you are free to move into a more expensive house. And that could be owned by real estate markets, at least for the meantime. Maybe in the long term, there's a better system for that.
So you're rewarding work. Not everybody makes the same
To a
amount
degree.
of money. Where my problem would lie is that if I get a call right now at 3 a.m. on January 8th,
Mhm.
and we have a broken heater and it's -60 and the winds are coming out of the north at 50, I got to go get up on that roof for the next 8 hours and fix that unit. I'm
Mhm.
not willing to be paid the same amount as my daughter that goes up to Subway and throws some sandwiches together.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that's another thing that people kind of assume of Marxist systems.
Mhm.
So let's be clear real quick. Communism is kind of the goal, but socialism is the transitionary period in between capitalism and and communism. So at the very least, during the socialist transition, and maybe we'll decide to stay, halfway or 3/4 of the way or
I
whatever.
think we're there right now, but whatever. I feel like we are. My check says we are.
There's plenty of room in Marxist theory, and nothing in Marx that would contradict the idea that different forms of work are worth different things. We don't just because we're getting rid of capitalism doesn't mean we deny the reality of supply and demand.
Would that not create different classes of individuals based off of the type of employment they have?
We're not against people owning different amounts of money.
Like a tier system, you can move about up and down depending on how hard you want to work.
you can do it that way. I think there can be some problems with that. Soviet Russia did that more or less, and there were some problems that arose out of that because they tried to run it sort of too centrally, where it would be like, oh, if you work at a certain amount, oh, you've earned the next tier of housing, or something like that.
I feel like we're getting kind of just 1 second. I feel like any form of government, that we install in any country, is always going to be flawed because we are bringing humans all together, right? And then humans inherently are going to go corrupt. It doesn't matter, capitalism, socialism. So let's talk more about freedom, personal individual freedom. That's where I'm getting hung up on any kind of dictatorship.
Yeah. So yeah, a lot of modern socialists won't use the term dictatorship of the proletariat because over the past 100 years, we've grown a very earned distaste for the term dictatorship. But Marxists oppose dictators, but a tyranny of the proletariat or a dictatorship of the proletariat is just pure democracy. Pure democracy is the working class having a tyranny over the
So
state.
that's legit and that's real. So let's talk about a popular vote. So the popular vote has probably gone Democratic for a while, right?
Mhm.
But yet California doesn't feel appealing to me. New York City doesn't feel appealing to me. Neither does DC. None of those coasts that have the population is anywhere that I would ever even attempt to raise my children in.
Right.
There's not an amount of money that you could pay me for me to go there and raise my kids there. Oh, put them in private school. Fuck you. I'm not doing that.
And again, I hate the Democratic Party. They don't run places well. And I personally would move to richer areas of California and New York if I had the ability to. And I would also definitely live in a blue state over a red state just because of things like reproductive and queer rights and those types of things. Especially, places like Pennsylvania, New Jersey. Well, so that gets into the kind of modern cultural war topics.
Is this a good transition?
Sure.
Because
I wanted to.
Sorry, Heather.
You
Everybody
guys
got
want to say
something to
anything
say.
else?
Sorry, and the comments are full.
Yeah,
Sorry,
I was
let's
getting ready to
let's
say
take
I'm
a
going to go
break.
through some more of these comments real fast because I don't want to switch subjects as these comments are pertaining.
I'll be right
to what
back.
we were
I
just
have
talking.
to use the restroom really quick.
Okay, I have to cough real quick.
Joey's asking about human nature getting at absolute power corrupting absolutely. That's my main concern. And
Yeah.
also glad to see Joey here.
Kaiser, the one thing that struck me is when you talk about it being democratic or a democracy, the dictator of the proletariat or dictatorship of the proletariat. Here's what I have a problem with. Who controls the money?
There's always got to be a guy.
There's always
Yeah.
a hierarchy.
And the way that generally Marxists advocate for state structures to be is that you have a democracy and you have elected officials, much like we have very much in a Republican way, setting up a republic structure of sorts, where you have some form of bureaucracy, maybe some form of representation, some administrations and ministries that are dedicated to various things. Like you need some central place that at least runs the numbers,
Right. And it's set up to each according to their need. So what if my kid has something happen, right?
Mhm.
The coffers are going to come. It's going to pay for my kid. This is a very anecdotal, small sacrifice situation, right?
Mhm.
But let's say that in my community, because it'll be set up that way, it'll be set up communal, small structures. That's the only way that this system would ever work. It would, in my opinion, it will never
Smaller
work
the better.
on a country level because it will become tribal like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the kind of communalist bottom-up approach is the only appropriate approach for building any form of government, period.
Right. So we have this pool, right? We've all collectively, and I fucking hate it. I know you know that about me already, but this collective effort, we've pooled in our resources.
Mhm.
My kid had something tragic happen, and so we're all allocating the funds to that. Billy Joe across the street broke his leg, so we're allocating funds to that.
Mhm.
Kaza has a heart attack. Kaiza, I'm sorry. We don't have enough money for Kaiza's heart attack. I'm so sorry. We've got to replenish our funds. You're fucked, bro.
Mhm.
And that system doesn't work. Pooling resources and then and to each according to their need, it doesn't work. Eventually, that pot runs out.
I think
I'm
there's a
glad-
magic
I think,
number where it works, but that number is like 100.
Yeah, it's definitely true that it works on that scale for sure. But also, I think if you look back at Chile, when Chile briefly had a socialist leader before he was ousted, they ran a system called Cybersyn that did a very good job of allocating resources wherever they were needed. And they did that without computers in the 60s and 70s. And we're starting to incorporate computers when Augusto Pinochet took over. So I think they demonstrated that it can work, at least on the scale of hundreds of thousands, if not millions. I can't remember what Chile's population was at the time. But I think that the approach of going bottom up and having first communal allocation and then maybe statewide allocation and then federal allocation of resources, especially as we are America, kind of the richest country on the planet. I think there are more than enough resources to go around.
And we're not just that, we're a melting pot, right? So
Mhm.
there is a lot of cultures here that require a lot of different resources.
Okay, I'm going to burn through these real fast. I apologize to our audience. I just want to make sure that we keep the conversation flowing. Jake says, if democratic decisions are moral, would a majority voting to institute slavery also be moral?
No, democracies are not perfect. No system of government is. I just the Marxist position is that democracies do the best job at keeping things the best for the longest.
How is USA healthcare working out? Poorly.
great.
I'm an insurance agent, so I can tell you it's fucking garbage.
I got licensed in health insurance, and reading through everything that goes on in our insurance system is
it's
mind-boggling.
horrible.
Yeah.
Lots of good healthcare around the world. Tex said, America is the richest country in the world, and I want to ruin it. At least you're a good sport. Capitalism allows for philanthropy, which I do agree with that. I think that forced funding I'm not cool with it. I'm sure you can tell, like, I'm a very individualist. I'm very capitalist. Like, you're never going to get me into communism. Like, it's never going to be a place I go, because I've seen how it's been applied numerous times throughout history and failed so miserably, and millions of lives have been lost to it.
Always ends up people up against a wall, it seems like.
Yeah. But I do like the idea of voluntary philanthropy. And if the cause is good enough, the cause will get funded. You see that every day with GoFundMe campaigns, with Give, Send, Go campaigns. If there is a family who is in need, people will rally behind that family and they will help them. We wouldn't have that in a communist society, I don't think.
Yeah, correct. Conceptually, philanthropy is a good idea, right? You have extra money, give it to somebody in need, completely of your own free will. That sounds good. But what philanthropy really does for the richest people is it gives them an excuse, like kind of a way to give a little bit of money and look like a good person, but not actually do everything they could. So it's like, it's all well and good to say that philanthropy can fix some problems sometimes, but it's certainly not as good as trying to actually make sure that resources go to those who need them.
Who gets to dictate what is as much as I could?
Well, that's the problem.
Who determines that? You or me?
You, definitely, in the philanthropic system.
Right. And so when you say it gives rich people the ability to give some, but not as much as they could, who's determining that? I determine that, right? What if I know that down the road I have something big coming up, so I can only allocate X number of dollars right now to this cause?
Right.
That's your opinion
for sure.
that I could give more, but I get to be the one to determine that because it's my money.
But that's kind of the problem, is not that you know your finances better than someone else. That's of course true. But the problem is that we don't know. Nobody except for yourself.
How is it anybody's fucking business?
Well,
that's
because
where I'm not understanding.
Because, for example, Elon Musk has enough money, if he had the right avenues, which he could create, to make a huge dent in housing problems and in problems of world hunger. He has $144 billion to his name.
That's not liquid cash.
I know. But it is
everything.
wealth that he has power over. Yes.
He'd have to you can borrow against it, so he could borrow money, or he has to sell everything, and then that's assuming somebody could buy it from him, that they have enough money to buy it. But either way, who the fuck on this phone call is going to dictate to anybody? How the fuck?
This is
so this is where it gets like I like you, Kaisa.
We're back on Twitter right now.
Now we're going to attack ideas, because the idea of somebody coming in and dictating anything to me repulses me to my core.
Yeah.
Well, it goes to
and I'm not the only one, I don't think, in America that does. So the only way that your program works is if there's a fucking gun to my head and I don't have one in mine, in my hand. We're both gonna fucking die.
It goes back to what our buddy Bulletproof Baldy is saying. I'm liking a lot of his ideas. He says humans are dickheads even when they try not to be.
Yeah.
If you gave me the power, I'd fuck everything up, and I'm actually nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
He might bet the whole system on a Korean baseball game tomorrow morning.
I will.
2:30 a.m.
Just because I have the power to do it.
Well, so that and so I think keeping in line with the idea of democracy, I think the kind of the whole idea of the social contract is good in the sense that we are all as individuals trusting all of us individuals collectively to make a society and to function in it. And that's really the only way we can have a society, is if we are all individuals agreeing to pool together collectively. So I think to some extent it's true that everybody is susceptible to corruption when they're exposed to power. But that's the point of decentralizing power to as many people as possible.
Joey says,
sort of the Joe Rogan approach. It's too big of a job for one person. We should have a bunch of people.
Joey says, Kaisa, sorry if I misspelled your name. What is your, or maybe more broadly, the Marxist philosophical anthropology in regards to the state of human nature?
So, the only real like philosophical anthropological philosophy position in Marxism about human nature is that capitalism is wrong to say that people are inherently greedy. I think basically the analysis is that a lot of greed arises from having been disenfranchised. So if you are somebody who is negatively affected by the systems here, if you're a poor person in America, for example, you might be more likely to end up being greedy if you start to accumulate wealth, because you kind of have some level of inherent bitterness about what the system did to you. And to some level, it's a competition that you want to be the most successful person. You want to have a bunch of wealth.
And you're aware
so that's
of the
only
scarcity.
real.
You're aware of the scarcity. You're probably worried about losing some of it and going back to not having any.
Yep. And that's also an interesting topic that's probably way too broad to get into here. But another Marxist idea is that the Industrial Revolution would inevitably lead us to a post-scarcity world in which capitalism would no longer function at all.
Bulletproof says, Americans are the most hardworking, honest people I've ever met, but they are fucked by bad healthcare, dishonest government, terrible propaganda, which keeps those beautiful people dumb. There is almost no difference between the ruling parties. Nothing will change until people wake up to that fact. And, we kind of started off as, seeing eye to eye on quite a few things. First being the government is a big part of our problem societally. Do you think, I know that obviously you believe in the communist theory far more than you do what we have right now. But my question to you is, do you think that if we had some genuine government reform, let's say we completely got rid of the federal government altogether and went to a more federalist society where states ruled themselves, so you weren't paying outrageous amounts of money in taxes, and then you got more on your paycheck. So there you see a genuine, do you think that we could come to like a common ground and say, okay, capitalism works? That's evidenced by the fact that the United States is the richest country in the world. But I don't like how much money the government's taking from me right now. Do you think that someone like you and me could come to a middle ground understanding on that?
So my dad is a secessionist. He believes very strongly in states' rights to secede and thinks that that should happen. My main problem with that is that I think it's entirely unrealistic, especially in the modern political climate. I think
Brother,
if
don't tell me
we,
that you think that's unrealistic, but you think communism is realistic. You cannot say
well,
that.
I think it's unrealistic to assume that if we broke down the system into, let's say, total secession, that certain states wouldn't pool together and exercise power over other states, and that there wouldn't be conflicts. I think there would be a big power grab because ultimately there's a big power void that was just created.
Yeah.
Right.
How's Tennessee
and I-
going to perform on the world stage by itself?
Yeah.
Jake says Marxist countries' prosperity has come from the capitalism. These countries control their industries and bleed off the income from their competition on capitalist markets.
So that's usually oh yeah, and I see there's more there. They use cheap,
Slave labor to undercut labor costs to sell cheap trade goods and run huge trade deficits because their people are too poor to buy foreign trade goods.
Yeah, so that's typically a response to the claim that places like the Scandinavian countries or certain European countries are socialist or are doing socialism goodly well. What they have is democratic socialism or social democracies. And ultimately, those are basically the idea that you can have these socialist things, but also still have the market. The problem is that the analysis here is absolutely correct. They are still doing all of the things that capitalism does, profiting off of cheap slave labor and exploiting the global south.
Bulletproof Baldy says, yes, humans are dickheads even when they try not to be. Come to Ireland. It's class. I love Ireland. If you give
If
me
they
power,
would have a
I'd
little
fuck
better weather, I'd go.
everything up, and I'm actually nice. I actually love, I went to Cork, Ireland and kissed the Blarney Stone. I put my lips on everyone's piss. It's great.
Yeah, they pee on that thing.
I wish Dublin wasn't
Oh, the
so
locals
expensive as
do
far as
for
housing.
sure because of all the tourists that are ruining their area. Absolutely.
Mhm.
We do. That's not what he's saying. We do too, but he said there's plenty of money. It works in Europe.
He's talking about healthcare.
Europe literally works on that healthcare model. The HSE and the NSH, dear Lord. Seems you have 20 trillion for bombs, but no money for healthcare.
Yeah.
Hey, you're
Well, we
not
can
going to
all-
hear dispute from any of us here. We don't support war. We don't
Nope.
support. We're probably very well, at least
The
me
Uniparty,
personally.
we don't support that.
Uh-uh.
Like, I'm not a Republican, just so you know.
Yeah,
Like,
we're or
I tend
keep
to vote
trying
that
to, like,
way, but
ascribe
I don't
my
have a
beliefs
choice.
onto you guys.
Right.
I personally am politically homeless. I used to be a Republican. I am not anymore.
It's hard.
Exit says, how many free market capitalist societies committed atrocities against its own people?
It's a great book on that called The Black Book of Capitalism.
Philanthropy is better than force. As Gotham's biggest philanthropist, what more should I do? What's up, Bats? Good to see you in here.
Good to see you back.
Europe isn't communist, but healthcare is a right. Ooh, I do not agree with that.
No.
We pay fuck all for healthcare and everyone gets a doctor. Okay, hold on. I gotta push back on this just a little bit.
I wanna
Making
talk about
someone's
that.
labor a right, I have an issue with.
So, no, I would not say that Europe is communist, but the reason that you pay fuck all for healthcare is because we subsidize your defense. And the big problem there is if we weren't subsidizing your defense, you guys pay a lot in taxes. And your healthcare really isn't that great. Yes, you get a doctor. The last time that I lived in Europe, I was in England, and I've told this story before. It'll be a quick Heather story, and then I'll get back to the comments. But I was out with two brothers. They were twins. and they were car surfing. One was driving his car, his brother was surfing on the hood of the car. And his brother fell off because they were drunk as fuck. One brother ran over the other brother's leg, and it was a compound fracture. The bone is coming through the skin.
Wow.
We went to the hospital, and at the hospital, he sat in the ER waiting room on a gurney for 2.5 hours.
Oh my
And
God.
then went back into a room to wait for a doctor for another 6 hours before the doctor comes in and says, "Oh, your leg is broken." No shit, motherfucker. And the problem with your healthcare is, yes, you have a doctor. Yes, you have a bed. No, you don't pay
Almost too
much
late
for
to
it.
set it.
But your treatment is garbage compared to here in the United States.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of problems with European healthcare systems, especially the NHS. But also, I think it's pretty great that they'll never be faced with a $20,000 medical bill, or and that they don't have to pay $800 for an ambulance ride, and things like that.
There are trade-offs, but for speed of care, I would not want to get hurt like that in Europe. After watching it myself with my own two eyes, it's just
I always
not a great
find
outcome.
discussions on healthcare between people from different countries, especially America versus any other country.
Right.
Like everybody in those countries is always like appalled when they hear how much we spend, how much we have to pay for certain things, and a lot of them have this exact same attitude of it. Like, I would not want to get injured in America.
If you don't have 5 figures in medical debt, you're not even a real American.
I wouldn't want. I get appalled when I look at how we subsidize these other countries. It makes me appalled.
Yeah.
It's disgusting.
Patriot Girl Prepper says, so if I'm more, Chris, you're right. It is disgusting. And I think that we would have more money to allocate towards healthcare here in the United States. If we were taking care of our own citizens the way that we take care of other countries, we would be in a, you could say we were in a communist fucking society. Our taxes would be going, and it would be for the greater good, the collective effort of happy Americans. That's not what it is. Bulletproof Baldy says, I love Americans, but you're dumb on healthcare. Can I dictate free healthcare to you? Baldy really is on this healthcare kick. Patriot Girl Pepper says, core point, never give up your weapons. Exit says, if you are Elon Musk, have billions, where's the hospital you want to go to? Miggity Mark, how many free market capitalist societies committed atrocities against? I think we already saw that question.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm looking at 4 intelligent Americans and see that you do not understand healthcare for all, which is in operation across Europe. I love you all. We love you too.
For the record, I do think that European healthcare systems are far superior to America's.
He just finds
so
problems.
I'm with you on that.
Angela says, money and wealth only magnifies who you already are. Jake says, hold on, I have to cough real quick.
Well, she got on that mute. She's good on that mute button.
Jake said, ironically, Marxism creates more scarcity than any other system. This guy is a joke. I am actually really grateful that you came on the show.
This is fun. We had a good time. But we didn't get it. Let's keep going, though.
Towns should rule themselves. Micro-government. Read Gaddafi's Green Book. Bat says, and we don't see power grabs under the system you propose. So that's the other thing. Like, in every time it's been tried, once the power is seized, the power is never released. Why do you think it would be different?
Yeah, well, I think the biggest thing that never really gets talked about when leftists and conservatives talk about this type of stuff, or even leftists and Democrats, is that we agree that centralization of power is bad, but conservatives and especially the libertarians and super hyper pro-capitalist people, ANCAPs and people like that, they tend to ignore that money, the more money you have, the more power you have. And so when money is flowing upwards into the hands of a few people, you create the exact same problem that you have when you have a centralization of power of the state. It's just a centralization of power in a different form.
Miggity Mark said, I support any and all war against communism. Jake said, we spend more on healthcare than we do on war. That's a bullshit argument.
I very much doubt that number.
I don't know about that, dude. These new bombs, these
Yeah, we
2023
spend
bombs,
more
they're
on military
pricey.
than like the next top 10 countries in the world combined or something crazy like that.
How many trillion did we spend on that failed jet that never even
Yeah.
flew a mission?
Yeah, I don't know about that one, Jake. Who's attacking Ireland?
No one. We love Ireland.
Nobody.
Nobody.
This
Fucking
housing's super
nobody.
expensive in Dublin.
We love Ireland. $50,000 for a broken leg. Joey says, is anyone familiar with the iron law of oligarchy?
No, I'm not that smart.
I'm not.
Joey always comes in with the good books and all that stuff. Jake said, good luck at Medicare costs. Go look at Medicare costs is what he's saying. It still pales in comparison to our defense budget, if I'm not mistaken. But I could be, I am okay with being wrong. I'll look the numbers up and I'll correct myself on our next show if that's the case. Okay.
I am crushing.
1
gummy
second.
candies.
I
I'm
just
never
pulled it
gonna
up.
see
Healthcare and military expenditure as a percentage of GDP in select countries worldwide. So this is from 2020. United States obviously is at the top. Healthcare 16.8%, military 3.7%.
Yeah, I'm not sure what cost as a percentage of GDP exactly means.
Yeah, healthcare and the military expenditure as a percentage of GDP in select countries worldwide in 2020. So they just listed like the top 10. United States, healthcare, we spent 16.8%. Military, we spent 3.7%.
Nope. That's all black budgets. We're just doing black budgets now then.
Yeah, I'm definitely skeptical of those numbers. I would love to see where they're coming from.
Right. Does U.S. spend more on healthcare than military?
Dude, we sent more than that to Ukraine this year.
Yeah.
But that doesn't come out of our military budget. That comes out of our healthcare budget, probably because they are sending it under the act of COVID emergency, I'm sure.
Definitely could be the case.
Yeah, that's definitely what it says. I've looked it up like 5 different times.
No, I believe you. I am actually shocked by that, Jake.
3.7%
I stand corrected
for military. So why? Yeah. So go ahead. Sorry.
Joey says the iron law oligarchy states that within any society or system, a hierarchy will always develop without exception. That's true.
Has to.
And I think where
we weren't monkeys that long ago. Like we're giving ourselves too much credit.
Well, and I think too, like where, like you even made the comment, you're okay with people making more money. I mean, that creates that class of society that Marxists stand against. You have wealthy people who have more money.
Yeah.
Than other people.
For the record, we're not against classes per se. Like, for example, I do not hate millionaires, and I don't think there's any problem with being a millionaire at all. The problem is striving to be one. No, yeah, absolutely, that's good. I want to be a millionaire, but I think the problem arises more towards the billionaire side, because as a millionaires can earn that amount of money, but if you worked your entire lifetime just off of your own labor, you could never reach $1 billion. To get to $1 billion, or maybe that number is a little bit higher now with the inflation of our currency, however many billions it is, at a certain point you have to engage in some level of exploitation.
Mm-hmm.
The next thing is, as we've seen, communist societies are not exempt. See China, Russia, North Korea, and so on. Angela said, is that our military or supporting ours and other countries' militaries?
That's our military, probably.
Spending.
Yeah, it's probably that those numbers are probably just like, oh, our military budget's low, but it only takes in like what we actually have going on locally.
Destiny budget.
It was off of the GDP percentages, so we may run some bills off the deficit as well.
Yeah, that's probably what's happening.
Are we going to get into the other Miss
Yeah.
Heather Marie?
Yeah. I know we've only got, technically for the show, we've only got 9 minutes left. Eric, if you have to leave, I understand.
He's
I'll
into it. Look
stay.
at him. Keep
I'm
going.
okay.
I'll stay a little bit later so that we can have this part of the conversation. And guys, I don't want to disrespect you and take this away from you. So I'm gonna kind of let you explain how you identify. So one of the reasons for the audience to know that we had Kaiser on was obviously to talk the communism capitalism conversation. But in addition to that, Kaiser is also part of the LGBTQ plus community. And we wanted to have him on the show to talk a little bit of culture wars type conversation and discuss a little bit about how he got into where he is right now in that spectrum, and kind of discuss that whole element and how it's playing out in society right now. So Kaiser, I'm going to give the floor to you to kind of tell your story a little bit, if you don't mind.
Yeah. So, because I grew up conservative Christian, I never really had any concept of of anything relating to gender. I didn't really have a sex education. I was homeschooled, so in many ways, I was repressed as far as knowledge goes. So I never really knew how to interpret any feelings of any kind. I thought the Bible said that homosexuality was a sin, and all these kinds of things. And then when I just kind of started looking into it more and talking to people who are trans and non-binary and gay, I started realizing that there's a lot more to it. So over the past couple years, I've come to terms with my identity and sexuality. And up until 3 years ago, I identified as just a normal straight guy. And now I identify as non-binary. And I have other qualifiers on there, like online. I call myself demigirl as well as gender fluid. And I am trans neutral, which means that I'm transitioning my body hormonally towards the feminine side of the spectrum.
Okay. You said 3 years ago is when that process started?
Mhm.
And you, okay. How old are you, if you don't mind me asking? If that's
22.
okay. 22?
Mhm.
Okay. So you grew up in a Christian household and you felt like you weren't given much information from a sex education perspective.
Mhm.
I
What
would assume he
information
wasn't.
were you given in that time frame? Like, what information in that window of time from when you kind of left the nest to your decision to transition, what information were you given that you were like, oh, I'm totally like fluid and I want to be a girl and a guy and all of this stuff? Like,
Mhm.
what made you say that?
So the first thing that got me hooked on it was philosophy, because I grew up always loving philosophy. And a lot of this comes down to the more modern, as of the last maybe 100, 200 years, understanding of what the self is, and how we ought to treat the self, which led to the idea that gender is less so your sex and more so how you express yourself in a culture, corresponding to these two extremes of masculinity and femininity, like hyper masculinity and hyper femininity. So once I kind of started looking into that, and then I started talking to people, I had a few gay friends I started talking to, and then I met some transgender people and was kind of talking to them about their experience. I started looking up videos of people talking about their kind of journey, and I found myself relating to it a lot, and kind of looking back on, I was suicidal when I was younger, and had a lot of mental health issues. And yeah, I started identifying a lot of that as just as not being comfortable on the like super masculine side of expression.
Okay, so I need you to explain to me because I'm stupid when it comes to this stuff. And I'm just going to tell you there's a major level of ignorance on my part.
Okay.
But there are men who are effeminate.
Mhm.
And that doesn't mean that they're not men,
Right.
but it certainly doesn't mean that they're women.
Mhm.
And so I need to understand why there's this effort to reclassify sex as this broad spectrum of these are all these things when really you can just be a man that feels feminine.
Well, so there's levels to how much you want to express that side of yourself, or what that side of yourself really is. So like I said, the idea is that gender is a spectrum, not that there's like, a bunch of different points along it, or something like that. But you've got masculinity on one side, femininity all the way on the other side, and like as you move across that scale, you move from masculine towards the center, let's say, and along that line, you are more and more and more effeminate expressing man, right? But then you can cross that line, and you can feel like, well, a and I think I have this desire to go further in my feminine expression, and have breasts, or dress in very effeminate clothing, or these types of things.
I don't want to. Do you guys want to chime in with questions? Okay.
Well, I have. It's not so much question, guys. It's I'm super free rights, right? So if you want to be an adult, spend your money and transition by all means. And I'll tell you where I sit on transgenderism. Just what Heather did when you came in. I want to know your pronouns because I'm going to address you because I'm not a dick. You know what I'm saying? What I'm not going to do though is allow the government to compel my speech. That's not going to be a thing.
Right.
But I'm never going to watch if there's clearly it's a transgender man or woman, right? I can clearly know that that's a man, but is wanting to be a woman. I'm not going to go, "Hey, bro," in public. That's it's an asshole thing to do, right?
Yeah, it's a
It's not
decency thing.
civilized, and and that's not what we live in. But
Yep.
I do also am going to be super abrasive if the government tries to compel any speech, right? I'll get
So
abrasive
I'm
on
very
that.
pro First Amendment, and also for that matter Second Amendment. But on the First Amendment,
That gets great. It just keeps getting deeper. This show's gonna be 3 hours.
You
Do you
can't
have a
stage
little
a
bit?
revolution without guns, man.
exactly.
Guys, if you need to go, let us know because
Oh, no, I'm
we can
fine.
just keep going down the rabbit hole.
Yeah. So yeah, on the First Amendment, I don't think the government. So I'm not a free speech absolutist. Like
Heather.
like, well, there's restrictions.
Heather
that
goes
make
around
sense,
yelling
like
fire.
shouting fire in a crowded theater, or especially advocating for violence. If you're somebody who can reach 20 people, and you say, hey, you 20 people, go kill this black guy because he's black, I don't think that is something that should be protected as a First Amendment right.
But that's actual calls to violence that
Yes.
has been distorted, and saying stand up for your freedom, that can now be considered calls to violence.
Yeah, it depends on the context. Like if you're saying that in front of 400 people with
Doesn't
guns
matter how
that
many
really
people I'm
want to kill
saying in
people,
front of. Okay, I'm
it
not going
depends
to
on
get
the
into.
context.
We'll have you back on. We'll have
Mhm.
this debate at some other
Sure.
time. I want to stay on this topic. Where do you stand? So I think I know based off of what you told us about how your story started.
Mhm.
Where I have an issue, you are a grown man. You are over the age of 18. You are making these decisions for yourself and your body. I support your decision to do that. And how you want to live your life is how you want to live your life. You are, for all intents purposes, much braver than most people to come on a show with 3 individuals who, for the
Who
most
you
part,
know
don't
is
agree with
not.
you,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
It started with a fight on Twitter. That's how you ended up on here, right? So, that's that I have a massive amount of respect for you for that. Um, my question is, where do you stand on what feels like, from my perspective as a mother of 2 children, where do you stand on what feels like these social contagion efforts to sexualize children?
Oh, okay. Sorry, I was expecting a slightly different version of that question. Um, so there's a lot of misinformation, especially when it comes to transgender and how doctors approach gender affirming healthcare for people who are under the age of 18. A lot of people get the idea that doctors are actually transitioning, 13-year-olds and doing double mastectomies on a 14-year-old, or uh, uh, doing the what's it called, neovagina surgery on someone who's 14 years old. That's not happening. The standard of health, the standard of care, standard kind of way to go about it is that when you start to hit puberty, if you are, well, let me rewind a little bit. Kids are fucking stupid for the most part.
They're feral fucks.
Yeah,
Is what I
you
call them.
can't, you don't know what's really going on in their head if an 11-year-old is like, and if an 11-year-old boy is like, I feel like a girl, right? So the approach to that is that when they start to hit puberty, if they really are feeling like that, let's say they talk to a counselor or a therapist for a couple months and they are feeling like that, the approach is to put them on puberty blockers. And the point of that is not to transition. The point of that is to delay, because the process, especially for somebody who is like totally on the other end of the extreme, like they were assigned male at birth and they fully feel like a female.
You mean they have a dick?
Yeah, if they're born male.
Okay.
And so the puberty blockers are designed to delay that decision until you're more rational, 16, 17, 18, whenever that point hits. I think it should be 18. But the point of the puberty blockers is to delay that decision until you're more rational.
And how far advanced in your research are puberty blockers from just being chemical castration? Like,
So
how reversible are
puberty,
we? How far into this are we? And how far into the pharmacy's pocket are we? I mean, what are we doing here with this?
yeah. So I'm not very well studied on.
I'm pretty well
on-
studied, just so you know. I have 4
Okay.
kids and I dove into this.
So
Really heavy.
I'm not researched on like how reversible it is. But puberty blockers have been used for a long time for non-transgender issues.
Mhm.
For example, if a girl is raped 6-7 years old or something like that, their body is going to start releasing hormones and trigger an early puberty. Puberty blockers come in to delay that puberty until they hit 13, 14, because otherwise huge developmental problems can happen.
So I know one of the big reasons puberty blockers, not reasons, but one of the big things we did use them for were pedophiles in the 50s, 60s, 70s.
Mhm.
And it definitely works for chemical castration. So I guess, so let's say we're hitting, so I have 3 girls and 1 son, and my son hit puberty much later than my girls did. All three of my girls hit puberty. I want to say like that 6th, 7th grade, right in there.
Too soon.
Yeah, too soon.
That's when.
It's got to be in the chicken, right? So my daughter comes and says, Dad, I'm feeling like a boy. I'm going to go. I don't want to be. I'm going to push on you a little bit here.
Yeah.
You just told me that you didn't know or you weren't really sure how reversible these are, but you started the conversation in good faith. And I know it was good faith with, this is just going to delay it. But if you don't know if it's irreversible, then we can't really talk about it delaying anything, because
well, yeah. So my standpoint on that, I know one of the biggest risks is infertility. slash sterilization. And some puberty blockers carry a much higher risk of that, and I don't think we should be using those.
There's some bone density issues too. That's could be even
Yeah,
worse.
that's the part that I'm super not researched on.
Because now we're just starting to get our natural hormones that are going to make our bones and our
right. And I know how bone growth works in puberty.
So it's just how you explain the timeline to me that it makes me want to puke.
Yeah.
Because
so
now we're 10 years old, but just a second, we never went to counseling. We just went right to puberty blockers. We didn't even sit down with a therapist for 4 minutes to say,
I
hey,
did say to start with therapy. Start with
you
counseling.
did? Oh, okay. I missed that then. That's my fault. Because if we're that far over on the spectrum by puberty that we're considering one, taking her out of life as a mother forever, we're going to make this decision today. We're just not going to allow her to be a mother because it's like a 96% success rate on that right now. So we're making that determination today. And when I think personally, we might want to do therapy for a while. And real quick, while I have you, because did you grow up Mormon by chance?
No, I was Calvinist, Protestant Christian.
Okay. So that's the scary thing to me is that not that you didn't, but I hear a lot, not just on Twitter, but through the media, through the newspapers, that therapy has kind of been pushed off to the side, or it's puberty blockers and therapy. We need to stop it. Then we can do therapy. But we've already made the fucking decision then. What if the therapist comes in and in 4 sessions, the kid comes out and is like, never mind. That was my fault. I was
way more often than not,
you outgrow
therapy does precede using puberty blockers. And so the main reason I kind of arrive at this position, despite maybe not knowing everything about like the bone density stuff, for example, is that
none of us know that much, first of all, Kaiser, because we haven't been doing it at this scale ever.
Right.
It's never happened.
So yeah, I'm pro researching that more in depth. But also I think it has been demonstrated that pretty solidly that going through the wrong puberty, if you are transgender, is incredibly psychologically damaging, which is why there's a high suicide rate in the trans community, especially if they're not.
I'm going to let Heather talk about that because she's well researched in the suicide aspect of this.
Sure.
Okay, so the suicide rate 10 to 15 years after transition is astronomical.
When you realize that you can
I believe that number is based off of a study conducted in either Sweden or Finland from the 70s until 2003, and it was conducted on 300 people.
Oh, no. This is a recent study. This is one that was done recently, like in the last 2 years.
Okay, what study is that?
I'll find it. I'll email it to you.
Okay.
So there's a couple. I'm going to back up real quick. Because here's my problem with all of this, really, but especially with children. My biggest problem is that there's a very large effort to push back and say, nope, this is not a social contagion. These are people who are just finally expressing the way that they feel inside, right? My problem that I have with that, it's twofold, right? So the DSM-5 categorizes gender dysphoria as what?
I don't recall exactly.
It's a mental health disorder.
Oh, right. Yep.
Okay. So it also categorizes things like anorexia, bipolarism, schizophrenia as mental health disorders, right?
Yeah.
The only mental health disorder that we affirm as a form of treatment is gender dysphoria. We don't teach. Go ahead.
So the idea of labeling gender dysphoria as a mental health disorder comes from the trans community, but from trans medicalism, which was the most common kind of idea of people who were pro-trans in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And that preceded the idea of gender as an expression of self and being separate from sex. So it also came from the standpoint of biological essentialism or biological determinism. And so I don't think that it should be classified as a mental health disorder, especially after having, because I used to, and on gender ideas, I was radicalized via transmedicalism. So I did hold transmedicalist views for a while, including labeling it as a mental health disorder. And even then, if it is a mental health disorder, I do think that the appropriate treatment is transition. But that aside, the newer idea of gender as an expression of self, I think fundamentally can't coexist with the idea that gender dysphoria is a mental health disorder, or that it's because you're born with a female brain and a male body or anything like that.
Okay, so
I
we're going
think
to talk
that
some
is a
numbers
pretty
then.
damn radical idea to think that
It's definitely radical.
big pharma is your answer and not actual nature.
Well, that's the other
That's fucking
that's the other
sick. And that's
problem.
the other
As
thing
a
that's
as a
happening.
Marxist,
If you get a child, I think it's like it's if you get one at 10 years old, it adds another like $4 million to the lifetime to big pharma as a transitioner. As you get them to 15, it starts to get, so the earlier and earlier they get you, the more lifelong, because you're married to them.
Yeah, no, I definitely,
That seems a
especially
little, that
as a
almost
leftist, I'm
feels a little
very,
capitalist.
yeah,
It's quite-
yeah, no, it's exactly where I'm going. It obviously, with all of this acceptance of transitioning and accepting the idea of gender as an expression of self, along with that came people who wanted to make as much money off of that as possible. And I think that how much they charge for very, very cheap surgeries and cheap medications is ridiculous. And they definitely do have an interest in increasing, let's say, the amount of people who identify that way.
I worry these therapists do as well.
Because
Yeah,
the
and
LGBTQ
some
plus
certainly might.
community is at like 40% for it was like 13 through 17 right now in California. That seems to almost be like a social contagion to me. And furthermore, if half the population isn't breeding and abortion's rocking at its highest, how are we going to sustain ourselves? Or is that your open border philosophy? Just keep people flooding in and let them breed over there and then come here. And I just curious.
I mean, that
I'm not sure how
touches
that's
on a lot of
sustainable.
yeah.
Before
that
you
touches on
get
a
into
lot
that
of
water,
long
it's my
spectrums.
bedtime. I got to get out of here. Kaiser,
Thanks,
thank
Eric.
you for joining us. This was
Yep,
awesome.
absolutely.
We're gonna stay Kaiser, but
Yep. I will see you guys next Sunday.
he's got to go make some capitalist a bunch of fucking money. Oh no,
The wrong person.
he's got to go make a capitalist a bunch of money.
Not a good producer.
Yeah, so your question touched on a lot of things that we probably don't have time to get into, like abortion,
Right.
and population, and
But we'll come back. Hopefully, you'll come back.
all those sorts of things. Yeah. So all of this being keeping in mind, I think is why it's important for somebody who is or for the counselors and psychologists to be people in the LGBT community, especially who are trans, because they have that same experience. They actually know what it feels like. So I think they're much better at treating these things accurately. And on top of that, especially if you're like, let's say you're still saying that at 18, 19, it still might be a social contagion. Well, you can find out very quickly, because your sense of self and your body have a very, very intimate relationship. And if you start, and you can hear this from people who are honest, who have detransitioned, if you start taking the wrong hormones that don't line up with your your sense of self, your body will start revolting against you violently. And it's the same kind of thing. So, and this is where we get our ideas of gender dysphoria and gender euphoria. You can experience gender dysphoria if you're on the wrong hormones, but if you, so for me, if I take estrogen, and I start taking more and more, estradiol, and I start to experience gender euphoria, and start to feel more in touch with my body, more at place, more comfortable, then that implies, it's not obviously any observable thing by science because it's dependent on one's sense of self, and that's obviously very subjective. But yeah, the stories of detransitioners about like what it felt to take estrogen when their sense of self was absolutely not feminine, or vice versa. I mean, they describe it like hell on earth. So it's pretty easy to very quickly find out the relationship
Boy.
between yourself and body.
Okay. So I want to go through a couple numbers really fast if my throat will allow me to do so. Okay. So I understand that you do not believe that the DSM-5 categorizing gender dysphoria as a mental health disorder. I understand that you don't think that that should happen.
Mhm.
But there's been a huge so there was a report released here recently. It's been a couple months ago. So this is just based off of Medicaid because it was the only way they could track it.
Okay.
But according to the DSM-5, the rate of genderphoria is 0.005% to 0.014% for males and 0.002% to 0.003% for females. So it's much greater in males than it is in females, first of all. But according
Experiencing gender euphoria when transitioning?
dysphoria,
Oh,
period.
dysphoria. Okay.
But according to this report, in 2021, 42,167 kids on Medicaid between the ages of 6 and 17 were diagnosed with gender dysphoria. That is triple the 15,172 diagnoses just 3 years prior.
Mhm.
So
Do you see where that's going?
Yeah.
So do you think that's because it's more accepted now, or because kids are like wanting to be cool? Like you
So,
said, because when you started, when you came on, you were like, I'm this, and then I have all these qualifiers. Do you
Mhm.
think they're building their resume of qualifiers?
no, so all of this comes back down to the idea of gender as a spectrum. It kind of relies on that. So, first off, I think there is some of that, that it's more acceptable
Yeah,
and
because
now
it's
they're
not
coming
like
out.
that in Wisconsin,
Yeah. And
but they're
so
the
I
same
I
kind of humans.
definitely, yeah, no, and so I definitely think there's an aspect of that, and the kind of
Fit
at this
in
point
into a group. I'm trying to fit in somewhere.
well,
'Cause
no,
those
so
junior
so
high
I
kids.
definitely don't agree with the social contagion part of
Okay.
this, but I'll get to that. So the kind of at this point tired and annoying response to that is just to pull out liberals will pull out the left-handedness chart, and they'll be like, oh well, it happened there too, and I'm just like, that's just such a silly way to go about answering that question. So I think that that does have some impact, but I think the majority of the impact has a different reason, which is that if gender is a spectrum, if that is true, then it's actually more weird for there to be a high percentage of people on either extreme, because the majority of people should be somewhere here along the spectrum. So I think personally that the numbers make total sense if you accept that gender is a spectrum. And I would expect it. I mean, I think the percentage of people identifying as trans, that's also a hard number because there are some people who identify as trans who don't medically transition whatsoever. And there are some people who identify as non-binary but not trans, and some people who identify as non-binary and trans. And so the numbers can get really fucky as far as reporting goes.
And just to be specific, these numbers are based off Medicaid only. So that's not even including,
Right.
these numbers don't include the people who have private health insurance. This is
Yeah.
just the government insurance. So the other problem that I have is in that same time frame, 4,780 children were placed on puberty blockers, which suppress sex hormones, stop the onset of secondary sex characteristics such as breast development, menstruation, inhibit the development of a deeper voice, Adam's apple growth, facial and body hair, limit growth of genitalia in males. Then 14,726 minors started hormone therapy. After suppressing puberty, females will then take testosterone, so cross-sex hormones. Males will take estrogen to promote the development of what they call secondary sex characteristics.
Mhm.
Some of the side effects of those include females experiencing fat redistributed from their thighs and hips to their stomach, arms, and legs so that they appear more muscular. The brow and jawline become more pronounced. Their body hair coarsens and thickens. For males, their body hair can soften and thin. Fat is redistributed from the abdomen to your butt and thighs. Their testicles shrink. Their sex drive diminishes. Notably, some of these changes are permanent and can leave the adolescent infertile, especially coupled with the puberty blockers. So if you get them on puberty blockers and you do the cross-sex hormones, the chances are they will become completely infertile. So if they detransition later, they're never going to be able to have children.
And
Yeah.
when we
But
have this
most
conversation in
notable,
5 years, it's going to be different.
experts say that and other side effects are not well studied. So it's like
Yeah.
you're giving these drugs and you really don't even know what's going to happen.
Well,
Mhm.
we the big farm. So there's some companies right now that are getting paid to have lab rats because that's what this is. Because we just don't know. But I know this. I can't. It's not never been really good to fuck with Mother Nature too much. And I understand. I'm reading the chat over here too, and Joey is.
I know.
Does homosexuality even exist? Joey's my buddy. We both have orange cats. But the numbers the math doesn't make sense right now to me. That if what we're saying is true, these suicides will have been taking place since the dawn of time. And even if it's just right now, we've there it should be pretty just like how come it's only on the coast? And why is it more in celebrity homes? None of this makes sense. The math, none of this is checking out.
Yeah. Well, so I guess one thing I'll say on that is that I, especially having been conservative not that long ago, um, I get the perspective that people are just doing it to be cool. Like I totally understand that.
Some,
Yeah.
or
Yeah, for sure.
Because do you have kids?
No.
Okay, I have 4, and especially my daughters in junior high school. They just want to. These girls just want to fit in, and so if they
Yeah.
find a club, whatever, they're going to become that.
Yeah. No, yeah. And like I said, I totally get that perspective. But the reality is that in the current climate, if you transition in most states, or if you're female and you dress masculine before you transition, you get bullied because that's how kids are. And so I don't think the idea that they're just doing it to fit in has much weight. It's an attractive idea at
Hold on,
first because
Kaisa. I
people
have
do
to
want to
push
fit
back
in.
on you. Normally I
Okay.
wouldn't, but are you telling me that after transition people don't get bullied
No, they do. They do. For
just
sure.
as frequently as if before transition they were wearing the other? Because
Yeah, yeah.
I don't care how successful the transition is. Dylan Mulvaney's transition has been phenomenal. His plastic surgery, his makeup routine, his hair, it has been spectacular. Dylan Mulvaney still looks like a man in drag, essentially. There is no way. Blair White is another example. Her transition is almost perfect.
Yeah.
She's had ungodly amounts of money of work done to make herself look like a female.
Mhm.
You can still tell she's a male when you look at certain parts of her body.
Mhm.
Your hands, your kneecaps. There are parts of your body that you're not going to be able to change.
Yeah.
So
And
I can't.
for some people, there is a level of like not wanting to. Like for example, I think this is true of Dylan Mulvaney, and I believe this is true of Caitlyn Jenner and a couple of other people. There is an idea of like looking trans kind of on purpose, which I don't want to do personally because I want to look good.
Right.
But a lot of people, and it's the same thing with like alt fashion trends and stuff like that. There is a level of wanting to stand out with some of those, which creates some of those examples. But um, the for as many people as you can point to and say, well, their transition is not perfect, it's not complete, or whatever. There are a lot of people who pass perfectly, like Buck Angel and people like that. Um, and especially I think trans masculine people tend to pass a lot easier because they have facial hair and really, I mean, they look phenomenal for the most part. It's a lot harder to transition uh, to a
Male to
woman.
female. Yeah.
Um, but I think I mean, just like looking around right now with Florida and Tennessee and those places passing these laws about bathrooms. And then there's all these videos of people, stopping somebody in the bathroom and like, what gender are you? What gender are you? Where do you belong? A lot of those people just get it wrong. And a lot of people on Twitter will be like, oh, I can tell you're a man. And the person's just like, no, actually, I'm just a cis female.
Right.
So there is a lot more variability, I think,
It's
to
on
just
the
how
other
women
side
naturally
too.
look. You know?
Yeah. Um to that point though, when what you just said, there's some people who do it just to look cool or just to look trans.
Mhm.
Because right now,
Well, I don't think that they're transitioning just to look like that, but I do think that a lot of those people will dress the way they do and not use makeup for that reason,
right. I do want to
defying
go to
beauty standards.
some of these comments real quick because there's a lot of them. Joey asked what denomination of Christianity you were, but you already answered that, so you don't have to do that again. Angela said there are many examples of people who achieved millionaire status without exploiting others. It takes fortitude, tenacity, and willingness to actually try, which most Americans now lack. I
Yep,
agree with
and
that.
I did acknowledge that. You can achieve millionaire status with no exploitation, but not billionaire status.
You can't reclassify sex, but you can reclassify gender, right?
That's the basic idea.
We have no guns here and no school shootings. Go figure. Wow. So 8 years of age.
That's when we were talking about like how young to do puberty blockers.
Mhm.
Puberty blockers are non-reversible. No, I think you shouldn't fuck with kids' biological development for any reason. I'm old-fashioned that way. Trans equals anyone who wishes to express a different gender. It's a mental health crisis. This trans movement
Some of
is
it
just a
is.
distraction to transhumanism, which I could kind of see if you're a communist. I could kind of see that, like where
I don't like transhumanism.
um the left hand graph, which was shown to Tim Poll, Pool, maybe, was very
Pool.
interesting. Does homosexuality exist? I am
Yes.
curious to hear your answer.
Yeah, I think everybody is wired a different way sexually. So I think that is biological wiring.
Like left-handed people. Left-handed used to be the devil. Yep. Because if sex and gender are not immutable, homosexuality cannot exist.
That sounds like a conspiracy about transgender ideology being pushed, kind of more from that perspective.
Well, he's gay, so it's probably
That's
more
funny.
about a personal.
Okay. Sex and okay.
Hey,
Okay.
that's Joey. We have orange cats, so we always exchange cat pictures all day.
Yeah. I'm
Yeah.
a cat person too.
He's my gay buddy in California.
Baldy said just got burned. Do the orange cats ride each other?
Mine do. They're both
Trans
dudes.
is only an expression, just the words, and you're trans, right? No surgery
Sort of.
required.
Is that true? Is
Well,
that kind of the
I don't know about the no surgery required part, but it's not completely inaccurate to put it that way. You can
Where is
identify
the
as trans just from not identifying with the gender you were assigned at birth.
if I walked into a woman's locker room and just said, "Yo, I'm trans," is that cool? Or how do you figure that line? Because there's some fucking weird people in America.
Yeah, and while
We
you're
both
away,
know that.
we actually mentioned the stuff that's happening with the bathrooms right now briefly.
Now dudes are gonna do it just to be dicks.
Yeah.
Or troll.
Yeah, for sure. That is
legitimately they
really
are.
happening now.
Or rape women because
Or rape women or go to women's prisons or or just be perverted.
Yeah. So I think definitely the government banning you from using a certain bathroom has way more problems than it solves, as we're seeing now in Florida and Missouri.
What's the what are the problems that you're seeing with Florida?
Well, now people are just like, if you use a public restroom and you in some way don't look masculine or feminine enough, people will come up to you, whether you're trans or cis. And there's been a lot of videos going around on Twitter of cis people just being harassed just because they don't look feminine or masculine enough. And especially with like butch lesbians, have been experiencing this quite a bit. And so like, I feel like legislation like that tends to create attitudes where like if you pass a law that's like hot on the culture wars and you pass this law banning trans people from using certain bathrooms, then you have this increase in people that we're seeing just pulling out their videos and harassing them and being like, are you man? Are you man? Are you sure? Are you sure? And like calling police on them.
So do you think that this whole trans deal has caused some division in the LGBTQ plus? Like, do you think there's still guys that are like, I wish it was just LBG and leave us the fuck alone?
Yeah, there's a movement called LGBT,
or is that Gen X?
There's also gays against groomers, and yeah, they are largely.
What's the first one you said?
LGB. Yeah, that is an organization.
Oh, okay.
And there's also gays.
But that's been an organization since like the 70s, right?
Right, but now they've like separated themselves from like the LGBTQ community. Like there's there's a movement of gays, lesbians, and bisexual people who are like, oh, all this
not us.
Controversy about trans people is ruining all the movement that we've created, all the progress we've gotten, and
what do you think?
All that kind
is
of
that
stuff.
true? Do you think there's validity to that, or do you think that that's like just
it's all one thing? Yeah, I think they're just getting frustrated, understandably, especially those who were alive in the 60s and 70s and 80s, who had to experience that more. So I think to some extent, like the emotions they're feeling are definitely valid. But I think these organizations definitely do a lot of harm to the overall movement, and also I just lost the point I was about to make.
Sorry.
Oh, all of this like movement. It's like it is one movement. It is all about liberation of your gender and sexuality.
Real quick, I want to give a shout out to Will over on Rumble. I apologize that I missed your messages, but
I was
to
going to bring
respond
him
to
on
you,
because he's a pharmacist and
he's
he
a
was going to talk a
pharmacist. He
little
can
bit
talk about the drugs.
about the drugs. That's what he does for a living.
Heavy Steps, what's up? You did miss a lot. You'll have to go back and watch the replay. Joey said DMs between Chris and I are just cats and a few messages here and there about the latest NFL drama.
That's true. That's true.
Go ahead, Chris.
No, you go. Sorry.
No, I was gonna say I'm probably gonna end the show, but
okay.
If you have more you'd like to discuss, then we can keep going.
No, I think one thing I'd like to have you. So there's probably a couple shows, but one I'd like to talk if it's not like a trauma thing about the religion you grew up in.
Mm-hmm.
I want to know. I've never heard of it. I'd like to
know
I
a little
something
religious
about it.
What
was it called again?
Calvinism.
Yeah, and I have no idea what it is.
It's are you familiar with I mean, you know the word Protestant at the very least.
Yeah, 100. So I grew up in the Nazarene church and the Baptist church.
Okay. So yeah, it's basically the tradition of Reformed theology, broadly speaking. And especially Reformed theology as it was carried over to America by the Puritans and then spread from Jonathan Edwards and the Congregationalists downward. So, and then within that, I grew up in a conservative breakaway from the main Reformed tradition.
Yeah, we get into it sometime. That'd be like an hour. Because I'm interested, honestly.
Yeah, and now I'm still Christian, and
is that
a UCC church?
What is it called?
United Churches of Christ is the church I attend to now. So now I just have progressive theology.
Nice. Yeah, I was curious about that. When you said your religion, it didn't click in me. I was like, that may be another episode. I just learned about the new religion.
Oh yeah, I can talk forever about things like religion and philosophy.
All right, sorry, Heather.
Nope, you're fine. Last word goes to Bulletproof Baldy. Some say a big percent of puberty blocked kids would have been gay, but they're not now because they weren't allowed to develop. This talk is great. Well done, Kaisa. Dog bless you.
Thank you.
Yeah, you'll have to come back on and we can go further. Now that we
totally
initially know each other and now we can get into more stuff.
Joey says, sign me up for that one. That would be a good episode to have Joey on.
Yeah, we'll have Joey on for that one for sure.
Okay. That being said, I'm going to skip our normal 2 Truths and a Lie this evening.
Oh, that's going to make Joey mad.
Do what?
That's going to make Joey mad.
Joey actually sent me one of the articles for 2 Truths and a Lie, and he was going to recuse himself this evening.
Oh, okay.
But,
all right.
But
he is a good kid, isn't he?
Yeah, he is. He really is. He's pretty wholesome. Kaisa, can you tell people where to find you on all the social medias real quick before I end the stream?
Yeah, like Will and shit over on Rumble. They like to they do game stuff, so they like to know.
Yep. So just generally, I'm a content creator. You can find all my links from Twitter. My Twitter is at Sudojish. That's SUDOJIISH. And I stream on Twitch. I make YouTube video essays about video game design and art, and eventually about politics. Still working on that one. So, yep, you can find all my links on Twitter.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. To everyone in the chat, thanks for hanging out with us tonight. We love you guys. You guys take care and have a great Monday.